Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Ash Davis, Principal Practice Lead at Red Hat. The topic of today's episode is communicating value effectively. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but today's episode is really an incredible one. Talk about delivering value. Ash brings it in today's episode. I mean, the way he articulates value, gives some very tactical and tangible examples of value in sales processes is really incredible. This is a subject that we continue to talk about around the pre-sales community, but what does it actually mean? What does value actually mean? And I really appreciate and respect Ash's perspective on value and how it's articulated in the sales process. So I really think you're going to like today's episode. Enjoy.
Vivint offers a way for companies to deliver an incredible buyer experience, with pre-sales leading the charge. With Vivint, companies can meet the demanding needs of the sales-proof buyer by aligning sales with product, providing repeatable workflows, delivering on-demand product expertise, and winning more deals with transparency and trust. For more information, visit vivint.com.
Ash, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you today?
Doing all right. Thanks. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. You are no stranger to the PreSales Collective. You are part of our DEEI Council. You've been heavily involved with PreSales Academy, not only as an instructor and someone who helped us create content, but a mentor as well. So big thank you for all that you do for the community and for the profession. So I'm happy to have you on the podcast. I really want to know, how is that experience going for you?
I was so excited to find the collective to begin with, just to have a community of other professionals that I could feel like I had something in common with. But the academy in particular was something that really attracted me, just because of the mission of it, trying to get people, not just getting people into pre-sales, but going out and seeking people who can really use the lift into pre-sales. It has been one of the most fulfilling things I've done since the pandemic. I kind of went on a find fulfilling things to do while I'm at home. This has been truly one of the most rewarding. It does not feel like work.
We really appreciate that and appreciate you spending your time with us. And actually, before we started recording, you were mentioning your experience as a mentor. Do you mind sharing that with the community?
It's been a real awesome experience. I've had an opportunity to mentor people several times, but not in this capacity before. Not somebody who was on their way into our industry. It's been so awesome to see in my mentee the passion, the drive for wanting to do this, wanting to do it really well, wanting to master the craft, wanting to make it in, but also just that passion for wanting to do that new thing and getting out of the rut and getting out of the difficulty and frustration of the current day to day. And it's been so awesome.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think for me, one of the things that I like to talk about with PreSales Academy is changing your career trajectory. If I reflect back on my career, I was working in hospitality. I kind of fell into it. I was in operations. I had no semblance of structure in my life, my schedule. I was getting really underpaid. And I was like, I need to get into tech. I love that we are doing that with PreSales Academy and helping people change their trajectory, and really appreciate folks like yourself, Ash, getting involved and really giving back to the community. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's talk about your pre-sales career journey. What got you to where you are today?
It's sort of a funny story. I went to school for a very different degree path than what I ended up doing for a living, as is not a very uncommon story in IT. Basically, in my freshman year, I was like, well, I had no business going to private college and I was poor and needed a job. So I started looking on the job board, the university, and what was available was a position called Student Network Systems Programmer. And I was like, that sounds doable. Had no idea what I was getting into, but basically ended up working for the admins, the system admins at the university. So I thought I would end up in a computer lab cleaning keyboards, and ended up as a sysadmin. That's literally how I ended up in IT. When it was very clear to me my degree path was not going to be a career, I decided to make IT more of my career. I also did a lot of operations. In particular, I did a lot of infrastructure management and automation, virtualization, things like that. I really enjoy the laziness of not wanting to do something twice, and so spending 20 hours to do it really well once so that it can be repeatable, right? I've really liked doing that, and I wanted to change. And a friend of mine who worked at Red Hat, where I still work, basically was like, you should just come do what I do. And I said, okay, I'll try it. And here I am, teaching other people how to get into pre-sales. So it's great.
Those are my favorite stories. There's so many people who just fell into this profession and now are here. And again, it's the best job no one's ever heard of. But Ash, you are an expert in what you do. And, as we were talking about podcast topics, this idea of value was something that we wanted to touch on. I think it's talked about a lot in the community, but it's so broad. There's so many ways that we can take value. So the topic of today's episode is communicating value effectively. I feel like those three words are extremely powerful put together. This is a broad topic, but I'm really excited to dive in this with you today. I want to start with maybe the obvious question. Let's get the obvious question out of the way. What is value?
The entire sales process is just the process of communicating value until the customer sees the same value in a product as the asking price you are bringing. That's really what value is. The way we describe it in PreSales Academy is value is anything that a prospect or a customer is willing to pay money or capital for. So value is that sort of nebulous, what is this thing that I want you to buy worth? And then to expand on that a little more, it's the value of the thing that you're positioning. And it's very much about what the customer perceives. We, the seller, we do not dictate value. We put a price tag on something, but the whole purpose of the negotiation process should go to show you that we do not dictate value, because at the end, value is what the customer perceives. What is it worth to them in their time, their money, et cetera?
So you're saying that value is not in the product?
Value is not in the product, not as it sits on the shelf, because it's just there. It's not doing anything for me, and something that sits and does nothing is not valuable on its own. So that value is found, like in this instance, where primarily we're talking like business to business sales and software, or maybe hardware services. But the value is found in the customer's implementation, usage, and then specifically what they get back, that return on investment from the product. So the sales process is like we go through 6 to 12 months to explain to the customer what that value is, but it actually takes them 6 to 12 to 24 months to really get that value. So it's a long process of extracting value on the customer's part, of extracting value from what they've purchased. So yeah, this is a really important thing, because a lot of times we want to walk in and pitch a product, right? But that's why we recommend being very careful not to just walk in and pitch a product blindly. Because if you don't know anything about what the customer wants yet, you really can't speak to the value yet.
Well, it's a really good point. I think there's so many times where we do have the curse of knowledge, and we walk into these situations of, this is our product, this is what it's going to do for you, this is how it's going to make your life better. But a lot of times we do have our blinders on in those types of situations. I want to put you on the spot a little bit, Ash. I want you to walk me through a few examples of articulating value as it relates to the product that you sell.
Okay, this is particularly fun because I'm in the open source space. So value is doubly fun because the customer can technically pick up the code that we ship for free on the internet, right? So like the burden of producing value and then of expressing that value is very high on the sales team. But I sell specifically in automation. And that's an interesting one when it comes to value, because automation is a massive, broad, sweeping thing, right? You could argue that really what underpins DevOps is automation. What underpins continuous integration, continuous deployment, all of that is just automation. But generally speaking, I'm in like IT automation. And there's a lot of tools in automation. They promise all sorts of lofty goals and these, purported values. The real challenge, though, is in communicating the value of automation to a business, not to a team, and not really the value of the technology. It's more about, hey, customer, this is what your business will benefit from automating, period. I've worked with customers in insurance. Typically, insurance offerings are really regulated. So there's only so much room any one insurer has to improve their offering for competitive positioning. So what is the competitive advantage for most of them is going to be their price point and, to some degree, their customer service. So to compete with others on price without affecting the product that you sell is pretty hard, right? Because it means that what you have to do is affect your business, and you have to affect something within your business. So the value of automation to an organization like this, and this comes from actually quite a few examples. I basically made it work once with one insurance customer, and then my rep and I made it work with all the rest of our insurance customers. It doesn't seem to matter what line of insurance it was. That was pretty consistently just the challenge within insurance. And the value was it can create and reinforce profit margins by reducing the cost of go-to-market. That reduction of cost, that was the value to that customer. So they paid, let's say, the same amount of money for a product that another customer paid, but for an entirely different core business reason. In fact, one of them was able to take automation and make money with it, which was really fascinating because the automation process made it so much easier to access their product that they accessed new markets just by doing that. Like that wasn't even necessarily expected. They were like, and here was an additional $15 million in annual revenue we didn't see coming. There's something to be said about also don't make it too hard for people to pay you for your product. But I've also worked with customers like in telco. In telco, automation is entrenched. It's a requirement that we have long scaled beyond manual work in operational technology in telco. So the scaling needs that they encountered, that's pushed them a lot further. So finding value for these customers is a challenge. I've worked with telcos to find places within their operational technology, which is like the outside of the building stuff, the cell towers, the control infrastructure for the cell towers, and also the massive routing infrastructure, by the way, like some of the most fascinating machinery in the world. And I worked with one that had a backlog of deployments. You could think of them as sort of edge network servicers. They would show up and do networking in a building or a venue. And they literally were just sitting on revenue they could not recognize because they hadn't installed it yet, because their installation took them like weeks. They would show up, they would stack stuff, and it would take them forever to install it all. And we automated them. We got it down to about, get there, plug in the hardware, and it takes about an hour and everything's up and running. They were like, boom, 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 through their backlog and getting all that revenue really quick. That was the advantage for them. Again, it's a bit of a reduction in time to market on that, but it's not the same reduction. It's not nearly the same kind of value to the telco that it was to the insurance company. So you have to be very careful when you're going into espousing a value, even if your desire is to save the company costs or time or reduce that time to market or whatever it's going to be. It's still not necessarily going to be the same, even if you have two very similar companies.
Wow, Ash, that was awesome. I love that. That was a great breakdown and great examples of value and really your real life experience. But I mentioned the curse of knowledge. And a lot of times we do have blinders within our organization, right? We have sales leaderships telling us things. We have pre-sales leadership. We have marketing, go-to-market strategies telling us, do this, talk about it this way. But as we talk about the idea of really this podcast of communicating value effectively, how can someone be sure that they're actually doing that with a customer or with a prospect?
It's largely going to look like checking yourself first. We also have egos.
No, pre-sales people don't have egos.
Pre-sales? Egos? No, we have egos. We also have human tendencies to coast. So there's a lot of forces that push against. And the problem with value in particular in the sales process, it is not coastable. You can show up and present on coast. I've done that. I did that for weeks on end. I would just fly like I was some kind of road show. That's coastable, but not value, because value is the hardest thing you do in the sales process because it's the deepest you have to dig. So whether or not a seller is conveying value in a sales process. So if you want to ask yourself, am I conveying value? Well, you might see if you're late in the process and the customer is like trying to drop, oh, I want an 80% discount. You probably did not communicate value very effectively, right? So there's a late in opportunity sort of signal for you. Another sign also later in the process, the customer will start adopting your language. That is a good sign. I was mentored that you have succeeded in the sales process when your customer answers objections using your answers. And in particular, it's when your champion does so. So when you have your champion in the room, you're doing a presentation to leadership, and the champion cuts you off to give your answer for you. I've had that happen before. That means that you have communicated enough value that somebody that works for the organization is like, oh yeah, I'm in it for this. If it's truly valuable to people and a customer, they will internalize it. A lot of that requires that you speak to the customer. So that's what it really comes down to. All of your statements that you're making, all of the presentations that you're making, are they about you and your product, or are they about your customer? You can't not talk about your product, but every conclusion of every statement should be, and this will help you buy. This will help you make money by doing. This will help reduce your X. This will help increase your Y. It's really important to make sure that everything is customer focused in terms of the way that you position every single one of those persuasive statements in a presentation, in a conversation.
I actually want to dig down on this and go a bit deeper. As we're talking about those audiences, one of the things that I reflect back on in my career, when I was at Showpad, we were selling sales enablement software, which we were selling to sales and marketing. Marketing was the one who would buy our technology, but sales were really our end users on where they found the value. That was really hard. Introduce sales enablement as a function too. It got really tough. And so what I would try to do was create value propositions for the demos and for our pre-sales interactions based off the audience that we were talking to. So I'm curious, like, as you're talking about these types of buyers and audiences, how have you approached creating different value scenarios for different audiences?
It's funny you would bring up sales enablement because that's a pretty big component of my job at the moment in a go-to-market organization. One of the things I have stipulated must be in our sales plays is persona-based selling guidance. If you're going to take a sales play for security automation into a customer, you had better know how to elevator pitch a CISO. And I have personally made the mistake of catching a CISO in a hallway, like the golden dream of every SE, and then having nothing to say. Because she was so impatient, like, who the hell are you and what do you want? And I froze like a deer in headlights. It was so intimidating. And you know what? All the time I had been talking about security automation, no one had ever armed me with what to say to the CISO. So it helps a lot, as you say, to know to whom you are speaking. And it is a very persona-based thing. So like what communicates business value to a director of IT, which is probably going to be a lot around operational efficiency, is very different from what works for a VP of finance who's going to care mostly about risk. And in fact, the person who cares the most about risk, if anybody does, is a CFO. That's basically the only person, or a COO. So I've had several examples, at least in my career, building one set of proposition, like value proposition for engineering at the same customer, and an entirely different presentation for the executive tier. Same sale, same set of solutions, same mix of software. But for the engineers, I had to prove to them that it was worth their time investment, that it was going to improve their lives, their quality of work. They may not have gotten a choice in the matter, right? Like if the business was going to buy the software, they were going to use it, but that's not enough. You have to have people on your side. So we had to really work to prove that value. And then we had to prove a value to IT director, which was a mixture of a bit of risk, a bit of don't worry, you're not going to lose your job. This is not going to burn and fail, which is every IT director's biggest fear, right? It is the guillotine. But for the executive tier, we focused on what all those changes would mean for their business. So we were aiming to reduce this is that insurance example that I was referring to earlier, right? Reducing the customer's time to quote, this entire concept of improving back-end efficiency through automation so that you can more rapidly respond to customer requests. And the executive presentation was like 10 slides and didn't mention a single product name. And I still show people that and they're shocked. They're like, you pulled in all that money and you never told them what product. And I said, no, I didn't have to tell the CEO what product the CEO is buying. The CEO doesn't care what the product name is, right? They don't care whatsoever. They care, what is this going to do for me? How much is it going to cost? And how are you going to assure me that I'm not going to lose my business? They were invested in the outcomes. So the presentation was about outcome, back to the nothing was about us. It wasn't about our products. It was entirely about, these are the initiatives we talked about. These are the goals that you have. This is the plan we have to get you from where you are today to the goals that you have. Sign on the dotted line. And they did. But that's how you communicate value. And if you've done it well, you get to that executive presentation without a single product and they don't have an objection and say, yes, let's go. That's how you communicate value well, because then everyone's on the same page. Everyone would give the same definition for the word value.
I love your opinions and viewpoints here and really how you're backing it up, because I think there's a lot of people out there who maybe think this, but don't always apply it in their day to day. Like I reflect back early in my career at some of the things that I probably didn't do well, and then teams that I've managed throughout my career. And it almost is beyond me that sometimes we don't have even demo SKUs or conversations based off different audiences. Consensus has the 6 demo types. And I would tell you that it was like a total random idea that I said, hey, we should do different demos to the executive who's buying our product versus the admin. And it was like, what do you mean? Well, this is what we do. I think that idea is just why companies and pre-sales people sometimes get stuck, is like there has to be a level of sophistication and going deeper with the targeted audience. And I love that you're talking about actually articulating value without even showing product, because I think that is the utopian scenario we all want to see. But you brought up something that I really want to dig on. This idea of talking to C-level without necessarily showing product. Have you ever been in a selling situation where your champion is bought in on the value, but the economic buyer, the person who's paying for this, is not? How did you handle that?
This is like the number one selling situation in open source. Everybody loves open source technology. No one wants to pay for it. So this is pretty much the best question you could have asked me. This is my entire career in pre-sales. The engineer whose day to day is spent maintaining community software often wants the business to pay for support. I am not making that up. I have been that person. I spent years maintaining open source projects because my company did not want to pay for licenses or subscriptions. And I remember begging, like trying so hard to get a Red Hat subscription because I was so tired of literally hacking my own security patches. And it's tough. Like I have been there. Economic buyers do not look at it the same way though. They often see open source technology as a freebie. If there's a table outside your building of free toilet paper, are you going to cancel your toilet paper contract and count on that toilet paper always being there? No, you're not. But they do look at it that way. It's not true, and it's incredibly risky. That's the number one thing we usually lead with. Like, listen, we are not kidding. Please don't do this. Please don't try to be a software company. We exist, and it's hard. We struggle with it. But that said, like, that's the challenge for us, building a value proposition beyond access to the code. That's where the value proposition typically ends for most software sales. We have to start by identifying why we existed in the first place, because community projects do not share business priorities, nor should they. That's not their purpose. So that's what we do. We charge money so that we can exist in these communities, so that we can keep them going, for one, and two, so that we can make a business-friendly alternative to risky upstream technology. Nothing has changed about our business model since we started. That is exactly what we still do. And we have to build a value proposition not only around the technology and its transformative power, because that is what we do, and we lead the industry in doing that, but we have to sell ourselves as a partner. And I have to do this by understanding how my customer's business operates. Then there's no coasting in this at all. It is hard because you have to understand where their priorities and their pains are, what risk they can and cannot handle taking. And then you have to take all of that and build a compelling case as to why it is worth investing in paying for something you think you're getting for free. In reality, it's not free, but something that you think you're getting for free, and then something that looks like costs a lot of money. We often prove that in both money and time, it is way less expensive to actually buy it. But that's the big challenge. So yeah, actually, really common scenario for me.
Ash, that is awesome. I'm glad I asked you that question because you absolutely just nailed that answer. And you made me think of so many things from my past that relates to. But
sorry for bringing up the trauma.
True. Well, this whole concept of build versus buy and sales enablement in like 2014 was most of what I started my career trying to do. So it's interesting that you talk about that open source concept. And I appreciate you talking and walking us through that situation because it's happening to everyone all the time. Sales is hard at the end of the day. So one of the things that you mentioned before I asked that question was about communicating aspects of value. So I just kind of want to dive in a little bit more on the communication piece as it relates to today's podcast. What are some different ways that you are communicating value?
The thread throughout all of this has been so far that value is subjective to your audience. Value is subjective to the customer. So everything that you're doing is trying to increase the dollar figure that the customer is assigning to what you are presenting. That is the entire process, right? So one of the most effective ways to do that is financial figures. Proving through industry research, through success stories with your customers, through lots of math and maybe a little bit of hand waving, you get financial figures. And financial figures are obvious financial value. That is the most obvious financial value you can provide to a customer in a conversation. You can communicate the value of a product also through its potential impact on a business. And that could be financial, it could be increased revenue, it could be a cost saving. Then that might look like charts and figures. You might say, look, this is the impact we expect to have to the business, and it's going to look like reducing your operational overhead by this much. It's going to look like saving you this much money on that budget. You can do that. You can also, and typically need to, also convey value in a more subjective manner by storytelling, painting a vision of the future. Because it's not just about, sure, from a financial perspective, it makes sense for us to purchase this, but what's the compelling reason? What is the reason that I need to spend all my personal time learning how to use it, applying it, and all the organizational unrest that's going to come with implementing a new tool? So there's a lot of personal, subjective storytelling that has to be done in painting that vision of the future. You may even look to do it in an interactive way, which is really effective, getting people on workshops, writing down priorities on sticky notes and agreeing on priority sliders. Getting invested is really, really important in that value process. Almost teaching the customer to see it the way that you see it as an SE. As long as your prospects' values are at the core of your message and what you're trying to do. How you communicate it is mostly about what the most effective medium for getting it across to the customer is. So of those many, many values, and the value selling course, we have like a whole spectrum of things from like the hard business finances out through the very soft personal values, like even something as simple as this could be something that gets someone a promotion, right? That's a compelling value for someone. One person in the process, not everybody, but that's, it's a very personal process.
As it relates to arming your champions and other folks in the sales process, they're going and selling internally within their organizations, right? So you have to equip them to make sure that that value prop is going to resonate with the folks who don't necessarily care if you get a promotion or if you hit your bonus or such. I remember that was a very early lesson that I've reflected on in my career and brought up on the podcast many of times. It's just trying to figure out that value prospect as it relates to arming those folks internally to sell so that you're not just co-selling with your own team, but like internally they're co-selling. I want to reflect on this internal aspect of things because we've been doing a bit on the podcast about messaging and value and articulating and arming your team within that sales process. So as it relates to value and internally articulating value, have you ever been in a situation where maybe the marketing team is saying value is here and done by doing A, and then the sales team is telling people that value is this and found by doing B? Where does pre-sales come in to bridge that gap internally?
Coincidentally, that's a fairly large part of my job. It's important to understand what everyone's incentives are. Marketing is incentivized to make concise, clear, universally applicable statements. Marketing is not inherently expert at defining individual value. That's what sales' job is. Marketing's job is to give you overall messaging. Marketing should be working with a product to make sure that the messaging that they are codifying supports the direction of the product. So like situation I've seen, marketing wasn't clear enough. Someone wasn't clear enough about direction of a product. Products can do lots of things. Sell a product based on something the product can do. Unfortunately, that was not what the product was intended to do. Roadmaps change that functionality. Customer gets angry. It's actually way more important than it sounds like to make sure that you are on message when you sell a product. It is also way more common than you might think for marketing to be super, super wrong about what the messaging should be. Because here's the thing, marketing talks to like Gartner, IDC, and Forrester. Marketing does not spend all day talking to customers. They can't. That's why they pay other people lots of money to talk to lots of customers so they don't have to. So like messaging doesn't always work. There's like the best laid plans of mice and marketers do not always work. Sometimes they miss the mark. Sometimes it's out of date. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. I've literally, given marketing lines and have customers give me the like triple blink. The what? You want to try that again in English? And when that happens, like it's really important that the field, so that pre-sales, right, that we feed back. So we are super indispensable in this feedback because typically the SE, the pre-sales resources, we do the most presenting, answering of questions and objections, carrying a message, and then most importantly, carrying a message through to what a solution will look like, what eventually a bill of materials and an implementation will look like. So we're the ones who are supposed to take a message, define the value within that message for the customer, and then move it along the train path until it's at the station where it gets purchased. We're the ones that know that the best, warts and all. So pre-sales is a perfect partner to marketing, should really, really be in constant communication in improving how you go to market. So that's a huge part of what I and my team have established over the last few years. We did not have an organization that could do that could be in between marketing and the field to provide that two-way communication. That's now literally kind of my job. Half of who I communicate with is product marketing and product technical marketing about producing what field sales needs and being as responsive as possible. And we've got a really good relationship now because we proved to them that we were not their enemy trying to make them work really hard. We were trying to bring them the messaging that we knew worked so they would codify the messaging that we knew worked, and we can continue to iterate on that and improve things for the field. I highly recommend making friends in marketing. Work through your leadership to communicate when things are not playing out with customers as they should. Tell your managers, say, listen, we've got to go back to marketing and say, this is not selling. This is not moving product. Because at the end of the day, if you do begin inventing your own messaging around marketing, you run into a lot of potential problems. You run into a lot of potential concerns about selling the wrong product. So it's really important marketing does their job and that you tell them if it's not working out. And that's a normal part of the process.
I'm really happy that this is part of your job and you're able to articulate that for us, because I think this is one of the core premises of the pre-sales role. We are in this amazing situation where we get to kind of be that bridge between sales and marketing and be that feedback loop. And right now, as we think about how we bring value to an organization, it's a whole separate conversation, but people talk about pre-sales being a cost center versus revenue generation, right? Like we really play a role in messaging and product enhancements and really taking what's behind the scenes and bring it to front of the house to equip sales and sales teams. I feel like we could talk about this forever. And I really appreciate the level of depth that you're providing on these answers. It's very valuable. So I want to end with an advice question. There are plenty of folks out there who are struggling to articulate value in their sales cycles, both individual contributors, leaders, high-ranking executives. What advice do you have for those folks?
So I'm a huge fan of some thought leaders in this space. Much of my success is due to having internalized really good lessons that I was taught by really, really good sales enablement organizations and leaders. So the magnum opus for any sales engineer to read is Mastering Technical Sales by John Kerr. That is one of the most pivotal and important works because it defines so much about someone who spent time before there was any scholarship in this, having to think through all these lessons, and then bless him, spent years of his life not only writing books, which the 4th edition is about to come out, but he has an entire sales enablement training company, right? So it's things like that. If you're a leader and you're struggling with your people to communicate value, like seriously, like call an organization like John Kerr's or MJ Hoffman. Don't try to invent this on your own. I am telling you, as someone that writes sales enablement, do not try to do all this on your own. It is not straightforward. It is not simple. And there are really good contractors and partners out there to help you with it. I'm also a big fan of just personal development and reading and getting more perspectives. One book I really like was Daniel H. Pink's To Sell is Human. A bunch of the book follows a door-to-door vacuum salesman. And I know how silly that sounds, but think about it. One of the hardest jobs in the world is door-to-door sales. You have nothing. You cold open and you have all of 30 seconds to invent a value statement for a stranger at a door. So you want to really dive into the difficulty of it. Like that's really good in that text. There's a whole bunch of others that I can give, maybe a list you can put in the show notes. The other thing to do is practice. It's just practice. Check your notes of what you know the customer's pain points and value are before you plan a meeting. Framework your meetings. Seriously, I'm not kidding. It's the simplest thing. It takes like 10 minutes. Write out what is the message you want for this and what are the points you're going to make to support it before you go into a meeting. It will help tremendously keep you on the path toward the value that you know you are trying to espouse for the customer. And then continue asking yourself, am I talking about myself or am I talking about the customer? Check with the customer. How is this resonating for you? Make sure it's not a, yes or no answer. How are you beginning to see value in this presentation so far? And it should be a constant drumbeat for yourself as you present, as you build presentations, as you email, as you work through the process. Where is the customer's sense of value in all this? And if you don't know, if you can't answer that question, why, for the customer, fundamentally, deeply, you're not there yet. And you got to keep digging. And once you can, then the hard part just becomes how do you effectively communicate it?
Ash, that was a mic drop to end this podcast. So really, really appreciate the time today. I appreciate all that you do for the PreSales Collective and the PreSales Academy. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you around the community.
Thanks a lot, James.
Wow, PreSales Collective. Talk about communicating value effectively. That is exactly what Ash just did today. I want to thank Ash for all the work in PreSales Academy and PreSales Collective and our DEI program. It's so great to see impressive folks like Ash giving back to the global community and seeing the impact that it's having on our profession. And as we dissect today's episode, there's so many ways that we can go, but I love that Ash started by saying, we don't dictate value. And I think that that's a bit of a controversial subject because a lot of times sellers or sales organizations will say that we need to dictate the value and we need to articulate what that is so our prospect will buy. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that are realizing the value of our conversations. They are realizing what we can do and the impact we can make on their organizations. And really, value is the entire sales process. It's the hardest thing that we do. Ash talked about if we don't know what it is and we cannot communicate it effectively, we need to continue to dig. And he provided us different ways and methods of articulating and extracting value. And I really like that we talked about different audiences, speaking to value as it relates to the appropriate audience, because our champion might have different motivations compared to the executives or the entire organization. And there's this one powerful statement that I want to say again. Ash said we have to build a value proposition around not only the technology and its transformational powers, but ourselves as a partner. I do this by truly understanding my customers' business operations. Where are their priorities? Where are their pains? And what risks they can and cannot handle taking on. That right there is so powerful. And as we ended, we talked about the role of pre-sales as it relates to value. And we believe as pre-sales continues to be the center of influence within an organization, and really we move from a cost center to a revenue generating organization, how we articulate value back to the product team and to the marketing team is extremely impactful. We are the bridge internally and externally. And so it's time to continue to unlock the powers of pre-sales. And we can do that by communicating value effectively. All right, Pre-Sales Collective, please do like and share the podcast. If something really resonated with you, tag Ash on social, tag the podcast. You could tag me as well. I'm happy to respond and give you my opinion. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.